Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be reading a true crime story called The Murder of Jamie Bulger. Before we get started, I just want to say remember to like and subscribe or turn on post notifications so we never miss another video. And viewer discretion is advised. Alright, let's get into it. At what age can a person commit murder? How old does a person have to be before we stop seeing them as a child and start seeing them as a killer? That exact question was asked 25 years ago in Britain. The CCTV image of two 10-year-olds leading away a 2-year-old is forever seared into people's minds. Abduction, torture, murder. How can boys so young be so evil? That is the lingering question of the murder of Jamie Bulger. The day began harmlessly enough. Dennis Bulger was visiting a shopping center in Bolton near the city of Liverpool. It was a normal visit. She planned to go to the butcher as well as a number of other stores. Jamie, her 2-year-old son, was with her. At just after 3 p.m., they entered the shopping center and began to walk around. The butcher shop was on the lower floor of the shopping center. It was a busy day and there was a line in the store. Denise, distracted for a moment, lost sight of her son. She thought nothing of it. That same day, 2 other young boys had decided to visit the shopping center. The names were Robert Thompson and John Venables. Both were aged 10, playing truant from school. They came from different backgrounds, with chaotic families. It wasn't the first time they skipped school. They had quite the reputation for ditching their education. That day, they'd entertained themselves in the shopping center. As usual, this involved a string of petty crimes. They'd been shoplifting with apparently little regard for any specific targets. After that day, they'd stolen candy, a troll doll, a can of blue paint, and some batteries. Anything they didn't want, they threw down the moving escalator to cause a little bit of extra chaos. But the petty thievery quickly grew boring. They decided to take their criminality up a level. Earlier that day, they joked about luring a child away from its mother. They could lead the child to a busy road and push it into the busy road outside the shopping center. They'd even try to convince a child to leave with them. Inside one department store, a woman spun around to notice that her 3-year-old daughter was watching the 10-year-olds. They were trying to attract her attention. The woman looked around again, thinking nothing of it. Moments later, she'd released that both her 3-year-old daughter and her 2-year-old son had vanished. Searching around desperately, she found her daughter in a few seconds. When she asked about the little girl's brother, her daughter responded, "He's gone outside with a boy." The woman began shouting out for her son. Dragging her daughter, she broke into a desperate run. They ran outside the shopping center. As she looked around, she spotted her son in the distance. The 2 10-year-old boys were there again, beginning for the young child to follow them. When John Venables spotted the frantic mother running towards him, he gestured for the boy to return to her side. The mother ran up to her child, relieved. Before she knew, the 10-year-olds had disappeared back into the crowds. She had been lucky enough to spot that her child was missing. All it took was a second. Venables and Thompson, annoyed at their failure, slinked back into the shopping center. They hung around near a food cart, hoping to steal a handful of candy when the owner wasn't looking. That's when they spotted James Bulger, known as Jamie to his family. The 2-year-old was standing beside the entrance to a busy butcher shop. Inside, his mother was distracted. They walked up to the little boy and began to talk to him. Within a few seconds, they'd taken Jamie Bulger by the hand and began to lead him out of the shopping center. The image of the two 10-year-olds leading the boy away would become rhythmically iconic. The timestamp in the corner read 1542. It had hardly taken a minute for Dennis to get distracted in the shop and the two boys to swoop in and steal away her child. People remembered the trio leaving the mall. Every now and then, Jamie would run ahead. Venables and Thompson would call out to them, encouraging him to come back to them. "Come on, baby." To all intents and purposes, they looked like two older brothers taking their little brother out for the afternoon. Back in the butcher shop, Denise started to panic. Jamie had been right by her side seconds ago. She placed her order with the butcher, turned around, and he was gone. Her first instinct was to find the mall security guard. Desperately worried, she rattled off a description of her son and his clothes. It was read out over the loudspeaker along with his name. Half an hour later, however, no one could see any sign of young Jamie Bulger. A call was placed through to the local police station, reporting him as missing. Jamie and his kidnapper were already outside. They started to walk, meandering around the area for almost 2.5 miles. When Jamie cried out for his mother, Venables and Thompson ignored him, but the 2-year-old trusted his newfound friends. He kept following them. Eventually, they crossed Liverpool and found themselves near a canal. In the time it had taken to walk across the city, nearly 40 people had spotted them, but no one stopped them. Once they were near the canal, the two boys picked Jamie up and dropped him on his head. The force of the blow left a mark, and his shoe began to swell. Jamie cried. The boys left him and joked about throwing him into the canal. A passing woman heard the crying and saw Jamie, but she did nothing. Growing bored, Venables and Thompson decided to move on. They called for Jamie again. Even through the tears, he trusted them. Jamie followed Venables and Thompson, his forehead now bruised and bleeding. Noticing the cut, the boys pulled the hood over Jamie's anorak, I'm guessing is what it is, over his head to hide the wound. But it was still visible. People saw the wounded toddler escorted by two older boys, and they walked through the busy streets of Liverpool. One person even remembered seeing a tear rolling down Jamie's cheek. Some witnesses later recalled the boy was laughing and going along willingly. Others remembered that he was kicking and screaming, calling out for his mother, but no one did anything. One woman who had seen Thompson lean down and punch Jamie, shaking the toddler, did nothing but pull her curtains closed. When one elderly woman did stop the group, asking what was wrong, the two 10-year-olds said that they found the boy at the bottom of a hill and were taking him home. The woman suggested that they take him to a police station, and satisfied she went about her business. She would realize her mistake later that day when she sat down to watch the evening news. Another woman nearly interfered of fearing to take Jamie to the police station herself, but she wasn't able to find anyone to take care of her own daughter while she did so. Once again, Venables and Thompson were able to slip away undeterred. They visited stores with Jamie, and even though the owners were suspicious, no one stopped them. When they were stopped by a pair of even older boys who were curious to know who Jamie was, Venables simply stated that he was Thompson's brother. Again, they were allowed to continue. They were walking towards an old railway line in Walton, occasionally used but very isolated. The boys knew they'd be alone for a moment. Just before they arrived, they hesitated. They discussed whether they should turn back for a moment. They almost did, but their minds were made up. They led Jamie towards the railroad line. The time was just before 6 p.m. Out of sight of prying eyes, they began to indulge their basest instincts. Venables and Thompson tortured Jamie Bulger. First, they threw paint in his eyes. The can of blue paint they'd stolen from the store was splattered across the left side of Jamie's face. They'd kick him all over his body. Finding bricks and stones nearby, they began to pummel the toddler. They took the packs of batteries they'd stolen from the mall and stuffed them into his mouth. Ooh, that's bad. According to some police reports, they'd even tried to stuff the batteries into Jamie's anus. Oof. Jamie was stripped from the waist down. One of Venables or Thompson peeled back his foreskin. They beat and pummeled the 2-year-old until they became tired. Finally, they found a huge iron 22-pound fish plate near the railroad line. They lifted it up and dropped it squarely on Jamie's head. Ow. Ooh, that looks bad. Jamie Bulger's skull was fractured in 10 places. Eventually, the psychologist's report would conclude that the body had suffered so many serious injuries. It was impossible to know which one had finally killed him, but the boys weren't done yet. They decided that they needed to make the death look like an accident. They dragged Jamie's body on the railroad tracks and weighed him down with stones and rubble. A train would pass by, they hoped, and make the murderer look like a terrible accident. With the body carefully placed, they fled the scene. Not long after, a train passed by. It ripped Jamie's bruised, beaten body in two. Venables and Thompson returned home. Meanwhile, the police search was escalated. In the earliest stages, Jamie's parents were suspects. They were quickly ruled out, however. Jamie's photo was circulated through the media, and people started coming forward. They remembered seeing him near the canal. But the search led nowhere. The boys had crisscrossed the city too many times. When the police were finally able to check the CCTV files, they were astonished. They found the now infamous grainy shot of Jamie being led out of the shopping center by Venables and Thompson. The story instantly went nationwide, and the search for Jamie intensified. Ralph, Dennis's husband and Jamie's father, looked at the image and felt a surge of relief. "He's gonna be all right," he said to his wife. He couldn't imagine that 2 young boys would be capable of harming his son. This had to all be some terrible misunderstanding. 2 days later, Jamie's body was found. Everybody's worst fears were confirmed. The little boy had been kidnapped, beaten, and tortured to death before having his body discarated. Oof, I can't say that word. The police found evidence all over the scene, including murder weapons. An anonymous tipster who followed the story pointed the police towards John Venables and Robert Thompson. Both were arrested a short time later. The evidence was overwhelming. When the 2 boys were questioned, they turned on one another, each blaming the other for the idea. But eventually, Venables confessed, "I killed him." He admitted and begged the police to tell Jamie's mother that he was sorry. While Venables broke down, Thompson remained resolute. The police even thought of him as a cold-hearted individual, but it didn't matter. There was too much evidence. Both were charged. Due to their age, their identities were kept secret. Despite this, the public wanted blood. Though they were aged 10 when they committed the crimes, both were convicted as juveniles. They were old enough by a few months to be considered criminally responsible. The judge decided that their crime was one of unparalleled evil and barbarity. They were the youngest people to be convicted of murder in Britain in 250 years. The boys would serve a minimum of 8 years. At the age of 18, the cases would be reassured. This happened in 2001. Both were deemed to be model prisoners and were released. Given new identities and allowed to live under assumed names. While Thompson seems to have gone quiet, Venables was imprisoned in 2010 for downloading pictures of abused male children. He was imprisoned again in 2017 for the same offense. In the end, he served more time for these offenses than he did for the murder of Jamie Bulger. The case lingered in the British mindset. However, just like the grainy CCTV image of Jamie being led away by his killers, for many people, the murder of Jamie Bulger changed the way they thought about evil. It was a tragedy that changed Britain forever. Thank you for listening and watching. Remember to like and subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss another video. Another crime story coming later this week. Have a great day and goodbye.